Hey everyone, welcome to the Funk Bed Nation podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Noseworthy. The views and opinions expressed by my guests in this podcast are not necessarily consistent with my own views and opinions. However, I do my best to be respectful of their views and opinions as they express them, even if they differ from my own. Now let's get to the podcast. So talk about your background, Dennis, as the founder and the CEO of Researched Nutritionals. But
Sure. No,
yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm a little bit interested in what you did before, because I've seen the promotional video that you have on the website that talks about your background, and you've been in manufacturing for 30 odd years or so. But I think you said you worked for a couple of different companies before you decided to start. So what was, like, pre-Researched Nutritional? What was Dennis Schoen up to at that point?
Well, pre-Researched Nutritionals, I've been in the supplement industry for probably 20 plus years. And I started working at a supplement manufacturer that manufactured pharmaceutical standards. So my introduction to this industry was a high level of manufacturing. The people who on the manufacturing side came from pharma. So it was long before we had CGMPs, and it was a company that really put a lot of effort and money into quality manufacturing, sort of like quality counts. And so that's where I really, got involved in it. After that, I've been there. I was at that company for 10 years. We were purchased by a Japanese pharmaceutical company. And then I actually ran two other companies after that. And it's when I was running the first of those two companies, I got really involved in product research. I found it fascinating what we could do based on science. So that's sort of my bent on it, and sort of why I wanted to start this company, because what I've never liked in our industry are the wild claims that are made and there's no backing to them. I think it really brings us down. I mean, I think we can raise the bar quite a bit higher than that. And that's really why I started the company.
It's interesting you say that, because now I've been involved in functional medicine since 2008. So 15, 16 years, something like that. And I was fortunate enough to enter functional medicine through a clinical model that very much values understanding physiology and looking to research to try to marry what we can determine clinically and what research says about different natural interventions. And so I think that, like, hearing that from you as a supplement manufacturer, that you prize research, and I want to delve into that here in just a second. Like, to me, that's a marriage made in heaven, right? There's one of the frustrating things for me is that, and it's changed even so much since I've been involved in this, there's so many different supplement companies making so many different supplements. And I'm sure we could stratify them based on quality, efficacy, and, maybe there's some other things there. But one of the things that I look for as a clinician is I look to leverage supplements that are manufactured along the same thought lines, meaning let's look at a clinical problem in physiology. What do we understand about that problem? And then what does the literature say about how we can shift and change that? And it kind of sounds like we have the same approach, but we're just on two different parts or two different aspects of the health paradigm, if you will. So was that, and let me just ask you a direct question. Was that a thought process that was unique to you, or do you think that there were other people in around your sphere of influence or in the industry that kind of had the same thought process?
I don't, there are other good companies. We're not the only good company out there. I absolutely want to say that. But what's unique about what we do is that we actually do research on our products. So, and we'll talk about product development, because I think that's an important part of it, also how you approach it. But from a research standpoint, there's a lot of ingredient research out there. So ingredient researchers do perform research on their ingredients. Oftentimes they're white papers. They may not be full of research studies, but that's a starting point. And that's what most companies quote. They say, okay, we're going to do, ingredient such and such, this is what they say, and we build a product around a single ingredient. And our approach is a little bit different than that. We believe that we need to have good quality research that can be published in peer-reviewed journals on our finished products. We rarely do single ingredient products because rarely does a single ingredient or a single mechanism of action really help a patient.
Right.
The body's a whole lot more complicated
Agreed.
than that, and we recognize that.
Yeah. So then, how do you what were the steps that you took from this initial thought of, hey, we can raise the bar, to like, what were your first steps to start to change the paradigm so that you ended up where you are right now? And I'm sure it was multiple iterations and some trial and error.
Yeah, a lot of peanut butter we ate during those early days, but yeah, that's all part of it. But I mean, so the concept was we will do research, hence the, researched in the name, and research past tense because we've done it on products. So that was an important part of it. The other important aspect of it was to look at product development in our industry, and it goes along with the fads that are out there. If there's a new fat ingredient, then honestly, our industry just says, okay, let's make a product about that fat, around that fat ingredient. We don't approach product research or product development that way. We look at what is the issue. So where is there a problem in the human body that's impacting people, and why is it happening? So it's, for example, let's talk about energy, since fatigue is probably one of the major reasons why a lot of patients see practitioners. And so a lot of products out there are focused on, okay, let's give people CoQ10 or lipoic acid or E or C. And I mean, those are important for the Krebs cycle, and they're important nutrients, but that's not necessarily why people are fatigued. So understanding why they're fatigued is most important. So in doing our research on it, which we do a lot of upfront reading, what we found obviously is that ongoing and never-ending inflammation and high levels of oxidative stress are extremely common in our population. And if you look at the damage that those two things do to the body, the mitochondria is badly damaged by them. And why is it damaged? And this is where the importance of understanding how the body works comes in. We know that inflammation and oxidative stress will damage the mitochondrial membranes. So those are the phospholipids around the electron transport chain within the mitochondria. If the membranes are not functioning properly, then the electron transport chain within the membranes will also not function properly. And that's where ATP or fuel is actually made. So our thought was, okay, you can give somebody 1 gram or 2 grams of CoQ10, but if the membranes are damaged, it won't make a bit of difference. And so knowing that membrane health is a really big part of it, we developed a product that would repair mitochondrial membranes. And we use, as I said before, multiple mechanisms of action. So part of it was, okay, we need to work on the membranes, repair those. We also know there's a lot of inflammation in the mitochondria. And so how can we reduce the inflammation within the mitochondria? And then we looked at a number of other areas as well. But this gives you an idea of the depth we go into in product development. Now, if somebody is already doing a really great job in an area, we will not develop a product. We don't need to be a me too. Somebody's doing a great job, that's fantastic. But we look to do something that's not being done and do it in a way that should have a big impact. Because again, what you're doing, what we're doing, if we're not making people feel better, then we're not doing our job. And so that's what we, from a product development standpoint, then we do the research on it at universities or major research institutes, and then we get it published in peer-reviewed journals, which is very different than, oh, here's a white paper. A white paper is interesting, and it almost sounds like research, but it's really a marketing piece that has not been published.
Right. So when you say that you guys do research and have research-backed formulas, you're not simply talking about doing a literature review. You're actually doing original research, spending your own money in a lab with PhDs or research assistants with microscopes, doing whatever it takes. So I like when you start talking about mitochondria, you're playing my song. because I love the science behind all that. And I have used, and perhaps towards the end of the conversation, we can talk about some of your flagship products and talk about things like ATP 360, which is one of your products that I do use. But let's kind of delay that because I'd like to walk down a little bit of the science part. I would like to also spend some time getting some insight, kind of like a peek behind the curtain of what it's like to be in the supplement manufacturing business. But let me start with this. Like, let's talk about the original research. Like, would you say that all of your formulas are research backed in that sense? Or is it only select ones that are filling holes that you see in the market? And by saying that, I'm assuming that you look at yourselves as a niche supplier rather than trying to be all things to all people.
Yeah, we do look at ours that we really fulfill a niche in the industry and from a health standpoint. We continue to do research on our products. Not every one of our products is researched, but quite a few are researched. And we do them again, like, our liposome glutathione or trifortide was done at Penn State University, their medical college. So we go to research institutes and universities that have experience and expertise in an area. Just as you as a practitioner know that when you are running labs on patients, not one lab has all the answers. You go to multiple
Right.
labs to run the test. We have learned that we have to go to people with expertise who can design the studies properly, and then also know what to look for. And so, like in the glutathione research, the commercial labs that are out there, I thought actually when we started looking to do the research, we could use one of the commercial labs to do the studies, but we found out none of them do intracellular absorption. They're measuring plasma levels of glutathione, and that's irrelevant. Or they're measuring markers, and that doesn't tell you how much really gets into the cell. So if you don't know what gets in the cell, then what good is it? But Penn State had the ability and had the expensive equipment to actually give us that information. So that's what we really look for. We have a new study on a mast cell product, Histoquel, which is going to be done, which is just starting at Northwestern University. So we will go where the experts are. And sometimes it could take 12 or 18 months to really find the experts in an area.
So if I can play devil's advocate for a moment, and I hope I don't offend you by asking this, but I would imagine that somebody would object to that and say, well, you're paying for your own studies, and so isn't that a conflict of interest? So how do you guard yourself against those claims or defend yourself against those claims so that someone who is not just going to accept things at face value can go, okay, these guys are legit, like they've done studies and we can actually trust it?
Well, and that's a great question. And we get asked that all the time. And I remember talking about at one of the recent conferences at the end of last year, and we're going through the research on a specific product with this practitioner. And he said, well, so-and-so has research. How are we supposed to know? And again, that's the problem. We set the bar so low in this industry that we call something research when it's not. And my answer to that practitioner was, one, I'm sorry, our industry has done that. You shouldn't have to be an expert in trying to figure this stuff out. But what the only question I would ask, is the research peer reviewed? Is it published? If the answer to those questions are yes, then the study has gone through the rigor of the peer review process. And this is where you have people who shoot arrows at your research. They want to make sure the stats are correct. They want to make sure the right math and the right formulas, everything was done properly. So it's a process. We can spend 6 months in peer review answering questions, going back and forth. So I think the fact that, we pay for it, but we don't design it. We have these people who are experts designing it, these PhDs. And we're obviously interested in what the design is, but in the end, if it cannot muster and pass peer review, then I think you have an issue. But that's why we go for peer reviews. That's what distinguishes us.
Do you have anything in your process where you say to the researchers, like, hey guys, like, the results are the results. Like, we're not trying to steer the ship at all. We just want to know yes or no. I mean, is that part of your discussion with them when you contract with somebody to do research for you?
Yeah, we don't steer it. we are interested in this information. They're the ones who tell us what we should be
Yeah.
measuring. We don't know what we should be measuring. So, on like on the glutathione example, they're the ones that, yes, you need to measure intracellular. We need to measure oxidative stress levels. We should be looking at natural killer cell function. They're the ones who know this stuff. I mean, we're not experts in that. We have a group of people that work with them, but they're the ones who come up with the
Yeah.
design. So it's again, I think if we were biasing the designs, I don't think the peer reviewers would even allow it. They would see through all of that because it's pretty amazing how in depth they are with the questions they ask.
So since you mentioned a couple of products, why don't we sprinkle some product conversation throughout this and just kind of make it relevant in the moment? And we're talking about glutathione, and you're talking about the importance of understanding the intracellular levels, right? And so, to my understanding, there's no commercial lab available to someone like me where I can get a handle on that. I know there are some labs now that do serum or plasma glutathione. It's my understanding, and I'm more than open to being corrected on this. My understanding, let's assume someone's not taking exogenous glutathione like the Trifortify that you guys make. My understanding is that the majority of glutathione exists in plasma, and even though most cells have the ability to, reassemble the three different amino acids that make that up intracellularly in the cytosol, that the majority of glutathione that's inside the cell has been transported there through the action of GGT that's like embedded in the cell membrane. So does that mean that a plasma measure, from your perspective, does that mean that you think that a plasma measure of glutathione, say total glutathione, is clinically irrelevant, or do you think it has a role? It's just not as close to the target as we would like to get?
We question the relevance of it. Because again, we know the issue with getting it in. So for example, there was a study that was, again, we read a lot of research also naturally. And there was a study done in 2014 on a glutathione product. And it was a well-designed study because, some of the studies are not well-designed, but this was a published study. It was well done. And it showed that they could not statistically increase intracellular glutathione. It basically didn't work for whatever reason. Okay. And so just saying, okay, it will automatically get in doesn't mean it does get in. And similarly, people think that, using NAC is a way for most people of boosting glutathione levels. But, as the Penn State researchers told us, and again, they're experts in this area, they're saying, the body keeps very tight control on cysteine levels. So rarely will cysteine get out of balance. So if you're taking NAC, it's not going to boost glutathione. They say about the only time you really get the big bump with NAC is you have an acute drop in glutathione levels, i.e. Tylenol poisoning or something like that. And then you really pump in high levels of NAC, you get glutathione. So what we have to recognize is how the body really works. So you have to get into a lot of detail on that. That's why we think taking it in a form it can be absorbed is important. And that's what we are trying to prove with the research. And, again, how much is in the plasma is not really, because we know there's issues getting it in, and we know some people have genetics which make it tough to get it in. And so you're expecting the body to do this stuff, where for a lot of patients, especially people like you who are treating a lot of chronically ill patients, not necessarily is it going to work that way. That's why to us, it was the gold standard. We have to prove we get it in.
So in your, I think I might be wrong on this, but at least the first liposomal product that I had heard of was the Trifortify. Were you the guys who brought that to market, or were other people making liposomal glutathione before you?
Trifortify is the product that we developed. My recollection is when we first started looking at this, there were two companies before us. One was actually a compounding pharmacy that was doing it. They were the first ones to bring it out. They didn't have published research. on it. They did a small study on kids on the spectrum with it, and that I think that probably started some interest
Yeah.
in it. But again, going beyond that is what we were
Yeah.
trying to do.
So what about the differences between, well, not the differences between, because you can stack these strategies. Like we have liposomal delivery systems, which I think generally that's regarded as the way to deliver glutathione these days. But then you have acetylated glutathione, which can be in a liposomal form or it can be just in capsule and powder. And forgive me for not knowing this off the top of my head, but is the trisomal kind of a standard reduced glutathione, or is it acetylated as well?
On the Trifortify, it's a reduced glutathione. It's not acetylated, but we didn't need that with what we were doing. And again, the goal is showing that, and I don't think I've seen a study on acetylated glutathione showing that it increases intracellular. Okay. So again, that was what we were reaching for. We had to be able to prove that. And the other issues, are that glutathione is really unstable. And so just because it's in a liposome doesn't mean it'll get absorbed. And we know this because it literally took us 2 years I can't even tell you how many iterations of producing our Trifortify until we could prove the stability that we wanted. And so at one point after a year of this, and we had all these phospholipid experts and everybody in this room, I said, we have a lot of brain power in here. And I'm surprised after a year, we haven't figured this thing out yet. So either we're not that sharp and everybody else has figured it out, or something else is happening. So I had a purchasing manager go out and, purchase professional brand A, B, and C. And I said, make sure they're well within expiration and send them out for testing. And not one of them met label claim.
Really?
And, and so I thought, well, isn't that interesting? So, and it was funny because in the room, when we got the results back, one of the people said, God, that's great. And I said, really, what's great about it? Well, we're like everybody else. And my analogy back was, I don't think I want to be on the Titanic with everybody else. I want to jump on that lifeboat. Yeah. So we haven't figured it out. We have to figure it out. And again, we finally did, fortunately. But being like everybody else is not what I want to be. I want to raise the bar.
So does that mean then, as a practitioner, just because something is a liposomal formula, are you telling me that there are different ways to create liposomes that affect absorption and delivery? That it can be done well and it can be done poorly?
Yes, absolutely. And there's and also the ability to keep, in this case, glutathione within the liposome is important. So we think maybe the reason why so many of the others have issues is because maybe they're not staying in. We don't know that for sure. That was just a thought on that process. But no, that's an issue, and the ability to stabilize it beyond that. All glutathione has to be refrigerated, but not Trifortify. We have 2-year shelf life at room temperature, and we still exceed the 450 milligram per serving label claim. We also we do a lot of studies. We did another study, 104 degrees, 75% humidity for 6 months, and we still exceed label claim. We did another study where you open and close the tube because the large tubes are 48 days worth. So you're opening and taking out a teaspoon, oxygen's getting in there. What's happening to the product? Still exceed label claim. So we have a really stable form, which I think is also important. And again, that was part of this 2-year process.
So the liposomal formula, is that designed specifically to resist degradation in the gut and enhance intestinal absorption? Or does and if so, does the liposome survive that? And is the Trifortify glutathione still present in the liposome as it's circulating around the body?
Well, what we do know is that when people are taking the product, we suggest that they hold it in their mouth for 30 to 60 seconds. So you're getting really a lot of the absorption in the mucosal membrane. I think that's one of the benefits, and I think that's probably what all liposomal products are about, right? Is trying to get it absorbed there. Again, assuming it's absorbable, then I think that's what happens. We know it gets into the red blood cells, so we know it must be working. Have we tested to know if it's circulating in the liposomal form? No, we haven't specifically
I
tested for
got you.
that, but we've tested for the results of what we really wanted, that
Right.
intracellular
So
absorption.
you're kind of bridging the gap and saying, okay, we've demonstrated enhanced absorption, we've demonstrated enhanced intracellular, therefore the the bridge between present in the plasma crossing the cell membrane to go into the cytosol, that obviously is working,
Yep.
even though it's a
Yep.
reduced form. Okay. All right. So we got to beat that one to death. So let's move on to something else. But as you were talking, because I know enough about the supplement industry. I have a friend of mine who who does a little bit of formulation and has a very small kind of a standard issue manufacturing. Like he makes and sells his own supplements. And he said to me a couple of years ago, he said, Steve, like the supplement manufacturing industry, it's a dark and dirty place. And I think what he meant by that is that there's so much opportunity for fly by night companies to come in making claims, latching on to fad products, slick marketing, good packaging, but really cheap on the raw material. So what I'm interested in is, like I said earlier, like a sneak peek behind the curtain of to what is it really like to operate in your space, like to be, and I appreciate the integrity that I think you're bringing to this, which is you're not just concerned about the success of your company, you're concerned about the quality and the integrity of the industry, right? Like you said, we can raise the bar, and you would probably like to see others follow suit and raise their own bar, raise their own standards. So what are the pitfalls? Like what kind of stuff happens? What are the shenanigans that go on just in the supplement industry that either a provider like myself or a healthcare consumer should be aware of? You mentioned we did some testing, all the products didn't even meet label claims. And we know that this has been published on other things. So what's the dirty, dark secrets of supplement manufacturing?
Well, I think it's almost like in any type of business. I mean, it's sort of like trust but
Mm.
verify. I think that's an important part of any industry, not just the supplement industry. I mean, I've been in this industry for 35 plus years, but I've learned. I mean, that's really important to me. And you have to know who you're working with. You can't just order from Joe Schmo. I mean, you get people all the time saying, "Hey, we have such and such ingredient," and I mean, I remember, and this is going back a few years. Again, I've been in this industry for a long time, but when I was running this company, the Southeast, it was when melatonin got to be really hot and you couldn't get melatonin. And we had that ingredient in that product even before it got hot. And all of a sudden we're having trouble getting it. And so, one of my peers who I trust said, "Hey, there's so-and-so, in I won't say what state, but in one of the Western states, who has melatonin, I trust this guy." And I said, "I've never heard of this company before." And he said, "Dennis, it's okay." So we went and again, this is probably, 25, at least 25 years ago. And we purchased 100 grand, so $100,000 of melatonin. But because I didn't know this company, like we always do, we quarantine everything. And then we send it out for testing. Because there's just no way that we're going to use something without knowing and having the confidence that, hey, it's what should be in there. And when it was tested, it had no melatonin, zero melatonin. It was totally placebo. And so I was startled. So I had the purchase person send that out again for testing, same thing. And I said, now send it out to a different lab. I just cannot believe this. So 3 different tests, 2 different labs, no melatonin. So if you're not, and that's really extreme. I mean, I think the CGMPs that are in place, I think, are so much better now because there's all this identity ingredient testing that's required now, and then of course all the heavy metal testing, and that you're doing pre and post, and then we're doing micro testing on batches. So I think the chances of it happening to that extreme are less likely unless you're more of a fly-by-night company. I would imagine most of our I would imagine all of our major competitors are doing all the proper testing and doing it by CGMP. So I think a lot of that is not as much of a worry as it used to be before the standards were put in place, which I'm thankful they are.
So what are the hallmarks of a good quality company? Like, and I had a similar conversation when I did a lab spotlight with one of the labs that I use, and looking at the different certifications that labs can get as kind of third party verified. So, I mean, just because someone says manufactured according to good manufacturing principles and sticks that on a label, I mean, is there some kind of a watchdog system that says, hey, you're lying about that, so you can't use that? Like, how do I know, as a practitioner trying to source good quality stuff on behalf of my clients, how do I know what's good and what's not?
Well, I think one, it's probably hard. I mean, less hard maybe for you than it might be for your patients or clients, but I think knowing who you're working with, I think that's true in anything. You need to know who you're working with, because it's easy there's so many imitations and all this other stuff that comes through, and all sorts of stuff sold on the web that isn't what it should be. So number one, you have to buy through somebody you know. You just, that is reputable. There are certification programs within our industry that say, yes, you are certified, that you are, manufacturing CGMPs. Most supplement manufacturers are also subject to isolated and surprise visits by the FDA. And so they actually go through the records. And I mean, it's a really detailed process that can easily go on for a couple of weeks. To follow through the process, make sure what the chain of information is and how things are being done. It is truly being done to meet specifications. So I think a lot of that has made it a lot safer for people. And so I think there are a lot of good companies in our industry. I mean, I was consulting for a company, years ago in South Florida. And again, I can't imagine this existing, but this is a company that wasn't even refrigerating their warehouse in South Florida. And just think about what the heat would do to that. I just don't think that could happen now. I mean, I know that if you look in the FDA logs of what they're putting out, they're doing visits not just to manufacturers now. Now they're doing visits to people who are warehousing supplements and making sure they're being warehoused in conditions that are appropriate for the product. That's a newer side that I haven't seen, and I think it's great. Because again, there are a lot of great companies, and we just need to have all the great companies and keep pushing out the others. It's sort of like a probiotic, right? You want to crowd out all the bad bacteria. We want to crowd out the bad companies, and I think that's happening.
That kind of makes me think about the caveat of not buying your supplements off like Amazon, right? The Amazon store. And I don't know. To be fair, then I don't know if their warehouses are air conditioned and humidity controlled. Do you guys quality control all batches of raw material that comes in, or is it just you do everything?
Every batch. Yep, every batch. You have to do that. You have to do identity testing on every batch, and then even after we go through all of that and all the processes in the whole manufacturing and packaging process, when we're done, then we actually take samples from the new batch. We open up the bottles, and then we go back to our retained samples to make sure it looks the same, it smells the same, it's the same size capsule, whatever it is. It's like one last check just to make sure that everything is where it should be.
As a general rule, and I'm sure it varies by ingredient and formula, but what's the typical shelf life of, let's say, and I have a virtual practice. I don't inventory anything. I have everything drop ship. But if I was a doc who had an inventory, how long can something sit on my shelf and still be viable?
Well, if you follow, again, the FDA rules on expiration dating, so some people manufacture a date, so it's a date it was actually manufactured. So they're not telling you how long it's good for. And if you're doing expiration dating, putting, used by or expires by such and such date, then by law, you need to be testing it, and you need to prove that every ingredient in there meets or exceeds label claim at the end of that expiration. So I think most of our major competitors, and including us, do expiration
Right.
dating. So if you look at what's on there, you're going to be fine. It's that if someone has a manufacture date, that's what I would worry more about, because they haven't done that type of
Right. So is
testing.
there a rule of thumb that practitioners can use that if something they've bought or is supplying to a client has only a manufacturing date on it, is a good 6 months, 12 months, a year and a half on average? Because again, I know it's going to vary.
It's really going to vary because certain ingredients degrade much faster. Vitamin C can degrade very quickly. Obviously, glutathione can
Yeah.
degrade quickly, and of course, it depends on how all of it's stored. I mean, I, I almost hate to give a time frame, because if if they're not if they're not putting on an expiration date, honestly, I'd be less inclined to use it
Yeah.
anyway.
What's what it
I
sounds
don't
like.
think you should. Yeah, I wouldn't use it, because there are a lot of things that come into play. And if you're not willing, again, to spend the money to test and test and test and test, then, should you be in this business, or should people be trusting you to, use your
Yeah.
supplements? That's my
Yeah.
opinion on it.
So going back when you first started Researched Nutritionals, um, and said, okay, we're going to be a niche provider. What was the first niche product that you created? What was the first problem you tried to
Uh,
solve?
we probably started with maybe half a dozen products or whatever, but the areas that we were focusing in were mitochondrial
Mm-hmm.
function, because I knew what a big issue that was, and we've been in business 18 years now, so it's been a
Yeah.
while. So mitochondrial function, immune health was a big part of it. Those were sort of the areas that we started in, and then we also, because of how important detox is and how that impacts the immune system and impacts mitochondrial function, we went into that also. So we've expanded from that. We've looked at also into, mycotoxin illness, because what is that doing? It's also suppressing the immune system. So a lot of these things, we've obviously expanded over the years, but we're really known really for our products for mitochondrial function, for immune health, and for detox. Those are the three areas that we're strongest in.
And so would you say that you might give me the same answer? Like if I were to ask you what are your flagship products or product lines, would it be the same thing? Like mitochondria, immune
Yeah.
support. And so on the immune support,
My,
I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry, your question was on immune
Yeah. So
support?
when you say immune support, I mean, that's a pretty broad category, right? I mean, it could be anything from botanicals that are, antimicrobial to compounds that support natural killer cells to cytokine balancing and regulatory T cell promoters. Or it could be, for example, Lyme, as I've used like your microbial balancers with a couple of cases that I've worked with over the years with Lyme disease or some of the co-infections. And so when you say immune, are you referring to all of them, or in the category of immune support formulas, do you have things that you consider flagship and key? As one of the questions I wanted to field to you was, like, from your perspective in your lineup, what are some of the must-haves that a practitioner who's thinking about using your products really needs to have in their toolkit? And obviously the mitochondrial support would be a big thing. The glutathione would be a big thing. What would you pick out of your immune supplements?
Probably the number one would be our transfer factor multi-immune product.
Okay.
And so it's sort of, I look at it as sort of like a multivitamin for the immune system. It's very specific to really, and our focus initially was on natural killer cell function. So how can we support healthy natural killer cell function with a product? So it's a combination of a number of transfer factors, which are these really small, low-weight molecular proteins that often we think about them coming from colostrum. Yep. But they can come from, chicken egg. There's a lot of different ways of getting them. But when mom is passing her immunity on to the baby, it's through the transfer factors that mom's passing on to baby through nursing. And so So it's a combination of transfer factor. We do have colostrum we add back in, and a number of other herbs in there too. But it's really designed to promote natural killer cell function. We have a study that's out for peer review on this product right now. Again, on that, we've also been able to show some interesting immune modulation with it too, which we think is really exciting as well. But I think, the immune system is a big part of our health, and I think that's something that I think, I'm not so concerned about leaving my American Express card at home when I travel. I'm more concerned about leaving my transfer factor multiple at home when I travel.
So when you say immune modulating properties, are you talking about supporting regulatory T cells or modulating, say, Th1, Th2 cytokines?
Modulating Th1, Th2. We know that, they're antagonistic. So if Th2 is high and Th1 is low, what you're going to end up with, again, if Th2 is high, probably end up with a lot of food sensitivities to those patients. You're also going to find out, because Th1 is so low, that they're more likely to catch every bug that comes in the door. And so it's understanding what that balance is and how can you impact it. And so that's what we've looked at pretty carefully. And so I think the idea, because, again, everything in the end is modulation, right? Too much of any one thing isn't good, but we really want to make sure we're modulating and helping the body just promote a healthy balance to itself. Right. That's really what we want to do with anything.
So when you're saying about modulating Th1, Th2 balance, is it irrespective of which one is dominant and which one is depressed? Or is it only like the example you gave was, say, a Th2 dominance and Th1 suppression? So is it only for that particular profile? Or is it, in a sense, an adaptogen for the immune system where it's going to help balance regardless what the tone is?
Well, initially I would have said it was really if Th1 was suppressed, but based on the research, I would say it's this modulation of it, a balancing. I mean, I think that's really what we found that we can do. So it's almost in some ways more like an herbal approach, in a way of trying to make sure you're not going too high in one area, but you're really helping the body help itself in that regard.
As far as supporting natural killer cells, is it your sense that, and you may already know this from research if you've done it, is it your sense that the transfer factor is the heavy hitter, or do you think it's the herbs that you've included in the transfer factor daily?
We know it's the transfer factor because we've done a number of studies, but and we did this because we get this question asked a lot. And so it was a study we did just to understand it better ourselves. So what we found is that we took the product as it is now, the transfer factor, colostrum, all the herbs or whatever, we had like 193% increase in natural killer cell function. When we took the purified transfer factor stuff out of it, so we really, the colostrum and all herbs, which are still really good, I think we had like a 32 or 35% increase in NK function. So it was like a 160-point split between the two, which is really, we believe, due to the transfer factor aspect of it. So it's because if you look at colostrum, if you had a gallon of colostrum, you get about 1.5 ounces of transfer factor out of that. So it's a very, very small part of it. So, and then if you're looking at what people would normally put in a supplement, I mean, it's not a huge amount of colostrum, and it's obviously a much smaller amount of transfer factor. And so I think, finding a way to add more of that in there, I think, is very helpful.
And hence the reason why you would want to do the isolated transfer factor rather than, trying to take so much colostrum, right, to get the amount that would be effective. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So let me field a couple of other general questions, and I should have asked this when we first started, but do you have a hard limit on our time today?
No, I made myself available.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that very, very much. So what are some of the challenges that you face in, like, from concept to design to actually having a product to deliver? Because obviously you have to identify a problem that's not being addressed, or at least not satisfactorily to your opinion. Then you have to look at literature to say, what are we going to put in this product to fix the problem that we're seeing? Then you have to test it and make sure that it's working. and then eventually go, okay, we're ready to actually sell this and say we're going to put our name behind it. What are some of the challenges in that process from the manufacturer's perspective?
Well, one is time. I mean, it takes a long time, in my opinion, to really properly research, or actually before that, to determine that there's a real need out there. I mean, quite honestly, a lot of the product concepts that we had when we started, I would get by sitting in the medical conference lectures. And I'd be listening to practitioners speak or PhD speak and see where the weaknesses are, and could a supplement maybe address that. And so so that's the beginning really of the product development process. And then we look at what's out there. Has somebody already done a great job in this? And if they've done a great job, we won't go there. So the first part of it takes a while, because you have to spend a lot of time in really understanding what's happening biologically. But then, once you have that, and this is before you even look at materials, raw materials or anything, it's okay, is this concept, does it make sense? And should it fulfill that need? And then if so, which raw materials have published research on them that actually work in that area? So we look very closely at materials, and sometimes, there's enhancements. I mean, like curcumin's a well-known one, right? That, standard curcumin is very poorly absorbed, and then came all the enhanced curcumins after that. And but even with that, I mean, because not all of those studies at all are published, you have to look at the ingredient studies and make sure the designs are good. Especially if they're not published. Because I mean, one of them I remember, we know that curcumin is fat soluble, so it's better absorbed if someone has fat in their diet. So in one of the studies that was from a pretty decent sized brand, actually, they actually had all the subjects, before they took the supplement, have a bagel and cream cheese breakfast. So all the cream cheese, obviously all the fat. And I'm thinking, is that really what we want to encourage? Okay, everybody eat bagel and cream cheese. Now that really sounds good. Okay, I have to say that I don't mind doing that from time to time. But on the other hand, we want everybody to do that and if they don't, will the supplement work as well? So the design, we spend a lot of time looking at the designs of the ingredients to make sure that from our standpoint, they pass muster, because we don't want to bias the study. We want it to be real world, because in the end, if we have a product that requires on people eating a lot of fat, and they're not eating a lot of fat, are we really healing the patient? Or not healing, do you make them feel better, make their life better? Probably not. And if we're not, in the end, if we're not making people feel better somehow, then we're not doing our job, and we shouldn't be in business, and we won't be in business. So we have to, in the end, we all have to make people in better shape than they are now.
So what would you say, because you cited time as one of the biggest challenges, what's the average time frame from concept to viable product? Are we talking months or years?
It's typically at least 9 to 12 months for us from when we first come up with the concept. Because there's a lot that goes in it. Because then again, it's okay. Now, let's say, especially because we use multiple ingredients, because we're using multiple mechanisms, there's a potential that this ingredient will impact that ingredient. So there's just a lot of different elements in this to make sure that what we produce actually works, and each of the ingredients actually can perform as it's supposed to perform. So it's a timely process. And then once you do that, then it's sourcing the ingredients, and then and then in some cases, how you put it together. Like again, the glutathione is a great example. It took so long to figure out how to put it together, even though we had the concept long before that.
And when you're going through this design process and you're tweaking, let's call it tweaking, I have a question about like practical dosing. I know you guys, all supplement companies, are required to put some kind of recommended dosing. I know that you guys have recommended or suggested use on your website. If someone was to go to your website and look up a product, they'd see some recommended dosing. When you're doing your testing and your validations, do you test different dosing paradigms? And where does the label recommendation sit in the range of things that would be clinically effective? Because we all know that two people with a similar diagnosis or mechanism can take the same product, the same dose, and get two different responses. One might require more, someone might require less. So how do you, as a manufacturer who's responsible for saying, here's a recommended use, how do you determine
that? We first start with the published research on an ingredient. And so that's what we want to have in there. I mean, I'm surprised a number of times if you look at research, like there's this one raw material that I'm thinking about, or this one ingredient that they tested it at 250 milligrams per day and a gram a day. And what they found is the gram performed and the 250 milligrams did not perform. But when you look at that out in the marketplace, most of the companies using that ingredient are doing a suggested use of 250 milligrams. Yeah. I don't get that. I think that's wrong. So when we're recommending it, if we haven't tested it yet with the research that we do, with the dosing that we do it based on at least the ingredient research that's out there. We're not going to tell someone to take 250 milligrams if they need a gram. It's just not going to happen that way.
Understood. All right, let me go down through my list of some other things. Let's go back to the mitochondria. One of my favorite things.
You know what? I'm sorry. I just realized, and I apologize for this. I have a 12 o'clock stop because I have another meeting I'm supposed to be. I totally forgot about that, but it just popped up in front of me.
Okay, so and you're Pacific, right? So we're pretty much right.
Yeah, like in 3 minutes.
So 3 minutes. Okay, yeah. So no, that's okay. Like I said, I should have asked you at the very beginning. So let me just ask this as a closing question. Like, what's on the horizon for Researched Nutritionals? Either new avenues of business or just products that are in development. What's next for you guys?
Well, always products are in development, but research is ongoing as well. And we learn from the research projects, and not only just about how that product performs, but also helps guide us in other directions that we should be looking at. And so we continue to do that. I mean, again, this mast cell product, which I think is a big issue, a lot of people may look at, okay, let's block the absorption and let's focus on the gut. But we look at it and everything we do, try to look more from a systemic standpoint in the body. And so we will continue doing that, and we'll look at multiple mechanisms. Can we also reduce the amount of histamine being released, in this case from mast cells? So we look pretty deeply, and we will continue to do that to really meet needs that we feel are not being met.
So and are you part of that team that looks out for opportunities, or are you busy doing other things and you have a team around you that does that for you?
We have a team, but I have a real personal interest in it.
It sounds like it.
It's like, yeah. I feel like a kid in a candy store when we get into the research and this type of stuff. So I like it.
That's awesome. Well, I know you have to go, Dennis. I truly appreciate you taking time for us today. Any parting words?
I appreciate you ask. These are great questions you're asking. I do think we have a lot of quality in the industry. I think the industry has improved dramatically. But I still think, let's ask the right questions to get the right answers. So if you really want to know if something works, is there peer-reviewed published research? I think that's a big part of it. And again, that's who we are. So I appreciate you so much taking the time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I'll put some links to your company and certain products that we've talked about in our episode description. So anybody listening can just click a link and go straight to your website.